We're here at one of my favorite places in the world, Amherst, Massachusetts, at the house of Emily Dickinson, one of the most prominent American poets of all time. Emily Dickinson was born in 1830, and she lived in Amherst almost her entire life. She wasn't married, and she really found a way through her poetic art to find and recognize the constraints that hem us in society, and to also find a way of liberating ourselves from those constraints. She was a poet of the freedom of the spirit. One of the main issues for women in the 19th century was being utterly under the control of either your husband or your father. And she wrote this poem about that exact issue. And it goes like this: she rose to his requirement, dropped the playthings of her life, to take the honorable work of woman and of wife. If aught she missed in her new day of amplitude or awe, or first perspective, or the gold in musing wear away, it lay unmentioned, as the sea developed pearl and weed, but only to himself be known the fathoms they abide. And that depth that no one sees when you marry someone who's under your control, that depth is something that she spoke so profoundly about. At one point in her life, she wrote a letter to Thomas Wentworth Higginson, and it was a response to an essay that he wrote in the Atlantic Monthly. It was about how to be an author, and he talked about nurturing one's distinctive voice. And she wrote a letter to him. She wrote, "Mr. Higginson, are you too deeply occupied to see if my verse is alive? The mind is so near itself, it cannot see distinctly, and I have none to ask." And so in this letter, this verse letter, she asked him if she was ready to publish her letters, her poems. And he read the poems that she wrote and got back to her. We don't have what he wrote, but we definitely know that he told her that she wasn't ready yet for a larger audience. And it's an absolutely astonishing thing that the greatest poet of the 19th century was told that she wasn't a good enough poet to publish yet. But then after her death in 1890, her poems began to be published by her family members. And those poems have made a huge splash at the time they were first published. And the whole group of them were not published until 1955. But Emily Dickinson in many ways is a poet of the 20th century as much as of the 19th century. She speaks to our own time as much as to her time. She has a wonderful way of gesturing toward the transcendent, talking about the infinite. This is one of her most famous poems. It's called "Some Keep the Sabbath." Some keep the Sabbath going to church. I keep it staying at home, with a bobolink for a chorister and an orchard for a dome. Some keep the Sabbath in surplice. I just wear my wings. And instead of tolling the bell for church, our little sexton sings. God preaches, a noted clergyman, and the sermon is never long. So instead of getting to heaven at last, I'm going all along. That was one of the things she was. She cared about God and the religious and faithful life, but she expressed herself in an utterly unique way, different from all the people who were around her. And one of the things she wrote about, the last poem I have for us today, is a poem about the hiddenness of God and how painful that can be when we're suffering. And this is the poem she wrote. I know that he exists somewhere in silence. He has hid his rare life from our gross eyes. 'Tis an instant's play, 'tis a fawn ambush, just to make bliss earn her own surprise. But should the play prove piercing earnest, should the glee glaze and death's stiff stare, would not the fun look too expensive? Would not the jest have crawled too far? We do long to see God and to encounter the divine. We're grateful for poets like Emily Dickinson who help us see more deeply into reality. My name is Malcolm Clemens Young. I'm the Dean of Grace Cathedral in San Francisco, California. Thanks for watching. More good news.